We are joined by the great Tim Watts of BamaOnline, talking Bama spring game, which happened on Saturday. And I'm still trying to process, Tim, the image of Nick Saban in the press box as the spring game started, not coaching the team, going around telling our friend Glenn Gilbo, did you get lost? Or no, they kick you out of Louisiana, I believe is what he asked him. Nick Saban, we know he's not the coach anymore, but seeing that is still jarring to me.
Yeah, I think it's just everything about every time you see Nick Saban, he looks happy, right? Which you're not used to. You're so used to the intensity. He looks happy. He's having a good time. He's enjoying it. He looks at ease. But running out there, you wondered what, him watching the Alabama team run out there just seemed kind of not wrong, but it just seemed odd. I mean, 17 years is a long time for anybody to be anywhere, but especially in this day and age. I mean, that's like 40 years in the 70s. So seeing him watching, but having a good time, I mean, it was good. You had a lot of people at that A-Day game, kind of famous. You had Bryce Young come in, Caden Proctor's chilling on the sideline, Nick Saban. So a lot of interest in that A-Day game. Yeah, obviously Saban was the big story.
Well, but the other story is, what do they look like under Kalen DeBoer? And I think the takeaway is, yeah, still really talented. This is still a group that feels loaded at almost every position group. But it's interesting because the Justice Haynes touchdown was really the only thing we saw from him all day. But that one run, you're like, oh, yeah, he's going to be real good.
Yeah, and people were wondering, like, Roydell Williams had a chance to play and why he left. I mean, if you saw Jam Miller, I mean, goodness gracious, you know what I mean? I mean, Justice is, we know Justice is going to be great, but Jam's not going to be left out of that discussion. Extremely talented kid, looks just like an NFL running back. They blocked really well. Even Richard Young, Daniel Hill, the short doses we got of most of these guys, they showed you they're very talented running back room. And they're very young. They've signed 4 guys in the last 2 classes, and with Jam Miller on top, that's a pretty good group. The offensive line seemed to block well, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot to like, and that's not even going to be their offensive line at the start of the season.
Right, that's the thing. Caden Proctor, you mentioned, is just hanging out because he transferred to Iowa, and now he's transferring back. But the assumption is he plugs right back in at left tackle, and then what does that line look like once that all gets done? Parker Brailsford also is back full time.
Yeah, I mean, that's why, a lot of people are saying Bama needs to go in the portal for the offensive line. Well, they have. If they get Caden Proctor back, it's the number 1 offensive tackle in the portal. They've got Parker Brailsford, who is the number 1 center in the portal. So they've already filled in some of those holes. I still think you want depth there, right? I mean, even if you say Pritchett or whoever, if you know your right tackle, Proctor's your left tackle, you're still not very deep, roughly 4 offensive tackles on the roster. You still want one of those guys. And I've kind of been thinking, if you can find, it's hard to go in the portal and find a guy who's not going to start too. But if you can find a guy kind of like Barrett Jones, as far as the versatility, center, guard, tackle, I think you have a better chance of filling those roles. But again, those guys are going to be hard to find.
Yeah, hard to find in the portal for sure. And this is an interesting one, Tim. We were talking to Spencer Holbrook from Letterman Row about this on yesterday's show. He was talking about the depth of receivers at Ohio State in the context of, if you're Ohio State and you aspire to win the national title, you're going to have to play 16 or 17 games. And so you, even as deep as you are, might not be deep enough at receiver. And Ryan Day agreed with Spencer when he asked him about it on Saturday. Alabama, same thing. It feels like on the offensive line, they have everything they need. It feels like in the backfield, they have everything they need. But in this era of college football, where you may have to play 16, 17 games to win a national title, what would be the position group that you would worry about the most at Alabama right now?
I think they want to have more experience in the secondary. They've got talent, but again, Damani Jackson has been on campus 3 or 4 months, and he's the oldest guy in that group, basically. Malachi Moore's obviously there. I was talking corner, but you got to get some more experience. Want some guys, a lot of talent. They signed a huge class, a freshman, but again, they're freshmen. They're coming in. You're going to have to work through all the growing pains. So I think defensive back's the one thing you look at. Wide receiver, with Ohio State, I think it benefits them to say we're going to play you all, because they saw what happened when they didn't get the ball to Jamison Williams. He went to Alabama and turned into a first-round pick. So Wide receiver, I think you can get by with 6 guys. Offensive line and secondary, I don't think you can.
Well, let's talk about the pass catchers at Alabama because, we saw how well those receivers played at Washington for Kalen DeBoer last year, and three of them were legit stars. Rome Odunze is probably a first-round draft pick. Who could be that next, great receiver in Kalen DeBoer's offense?
I think it could be Jeremy Bernard, oddly enough. I mean, he knows the
Who was at
Washington.
Washington? Yeah.
We said that the whole time, when Isaiah Bond left, hit the portal, went to Texas, when Jeremy Bernard came, I talked to several people that said that's not a downgrade. It's possibly an upgrade. Now, he again is behind 3 guys that are going to go in the first 3 rounds probably of the national football in the NFL draft. So he had 3 wide receivers ahead of him, but you saw what he did in the spring game. He's got that look of wide receiver 1. He's fast. He knows his system. Made big plays in that game. So he's the guy I think right out of the gate that you have to look for. Caleb Odom, a true freshman, is a guy you hear a lot of people talking about as well. So I think the way they spread the ball around, you're going to see other guys emerge. Kobe Prentice is a guy that could emerge. It's too bad about the injury to Hill. He was a guy that had a chance, but they're going to have guys to spread it around to, but probably not as good a wide receiver room right now as they had at Washington last year. But I think they're working on fixing that.
Now, Kalen DeBoer has been pretty upfront that Jalen Milroe is the guy. He goes out with the first team. I don't know that they've officially named him the starter or anything, but they've made it pretty clear that he's the guy. How did you feel like he looked in that offense?
I thought he looked okay. A couple of drops hurt his stats. He was 3 for 9, completed a couple really nice passes. The one thing about him is you have to worry about the decision making. That's the question. He got the ball out quick when he got it out, but when he hesitated and he didn't find his first guy, he got, touched for a sack. And also I should note that when you're Jalen Milroe, you're not used to playing tag football. Nobody's touching you and bringing you down. It's hard enough to grab you and bring you down. So I think mentally he knew he had that escapability. And even though it was touch, he does what he does with his leg with a nice run. So I think he looked fine. Simpson's going against the twos. I thought he had some moments. We all think, Ty Simpson has that as well, the talent as well. I think overall quarterback room, if you compare it to last year, didn't really know a lot about last year's team, right? You had Tyler Buckner in there. You thought Ty Simpson might be the starter, Jalen Milroe. I think if you flip forward a year ahead, the quarterback room's in much better shape. I still think Jalen's your starter until proven otherwise.
Ty Simpson, Dylan Lonergan, Austin Mack, who's the transfer from Washington. Which of those guys is the backup, you think?
I think Ty Simpson, I still think it's to be determined. I think it's between Ty Simpson and Dylan. I think I would give Ty the advantage because he is able to pull it down and run with it. It's got a little more experience. I think Austin Mack's going to be fine, but he is young. His age, he does have that baby giraffe look when you watch him play. He is young for his grade, probably could still be at his high school prom at this time. But I think Ty's going to have the advantage over Dylan, and I think Ty would be the one pushing Jalen Milroe if anybody is.
How do you think Kalen DeBoer handled this first period? We had the check-in, kind of the first 100 days check-in, right when spring practice started, and they were bringing all the visitors onto campus. Now there are going to be official visitors for the class of 2025 coming in. How do you feel like Kalen DeBoer has handled the transition into being the Alabama football coach?
Yeah, I'd give him an A+, 10 out of 10. Now, I'm basing that on where I expected Alabama to be when Nick Saban retired 4 months later. I did not expect them to be in the shape they've been. They did a tremendous job of getting visitors on campus, more than I've ever seen at Alabama during that spring period. They went through the spring, and he changed the spring game up to kind of put his own flavor on it, and that's not the easiest thing to do at Alabama. You change something and, you can offend, mainly the fan base, but everybody wants everything to stay the same. But I feel like lost guys in the portal, replaced guys in the portal, did a good job there for the most part. And then they turned around, handled recruiting's been great. They had 2 commitments this weekend. They did a good job there. What they're proven to be are really good evaluators, and they have a type. They're going to go after the guys they want. I don't think, recruiting rankings matter at all. I think most of these guys will end up pretty highly ranked at the end of the day, but I think they're going to go out and get the guys they want, latch onto those guys. But I'm not sure what else they could have did better. at this stage in the middle of April. And again, we're about to hit the portal and see how things change, if anything changes. But I feel like he's did a really good job.
It's amazing because we spent so many years. I just remember I would get the mailbag question every offseason, and I'd answer it like twice in offseason because everybody wanted to know, like, what's Alabama going to do once Nick Saban retires? And we had all these different ideas about what the SEC would look like afterward. And just watching this group fill in and put its own stamp on this stuff, I just don't see Alabama taking that big of a step back.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, it's Nick Saban. It was a dynasty. I mean, all that. You're right though. The talk was the perceived talk, the wanted talk. People tried to talk it into existence from other schools. Was who's going to take the job? Remember that trend? Remember that? Who's going to take the job? Who wants to follow Saban? Well, they got one of the top 5 coaches in the nation to follow him. And did it quickly. Got him in there pretty quick. But we've went from nobody wants that job to people do want that job to recruiting. The roster's going to dip to the roster's pretty much. I mean, it's not as good as it was. Obviously, you're losing guys to the NFL and all that other stuff, and you've got youth all over the place. But it's still a really good roster. It's a top 5 roster right now, and they still have stuff they can do in the portal. I've been told by numerous people there's going to be a lot of eyes on Alabama as a destination. There's going to be more people interested than people they can take. So, I don't know what else you could have wanted out of this if you're an Alabama fan. I think your worst nightmare is nobody does want the job. You get turned down. I mean, you just saw the Kentucky basketball search. If you want to see how good a job Alabama did, and I'm not saying this is nothing against Mark Pope, to be clear. I think he's a good coach, and I think he's going to win at Kentucky. But they had to go through numerous turndowns to get to Mark Pope, and Alabama didn't have to suffer that embarrassment.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about that a lot lately because watching that Kentucky basketball search got me to thinking about how the Alabama football search went. And, we don't know what happened if Mike Norvell was the first choice or Kalen DeBoer was the first choice. Either way, they basically ID'd a pretty small group of coaches and we're sure somebody was going to take it. That was a pretty good job by Greg Byrne finding somebody who was qualified and not having to deal with that. I do think in football, it's harder to win the national title. Like, that Kentucky basketball search, Scott Drew can say, look, I just won a national title here at Baylor. I don't have to go somewhere else. But if you are Kalen DeBoer and you just lost the national title game to Michigan at Washington, and you know how good your team was, you're probably looking at it and going, I don't know if I can ever get back to this point here, but I can there.
Yeah, with basketball, you can find a guy. You can ride that guy. Never Nervous Purvis. Always go back to Louisville, riding him, and Carmelo Anthony. You've seen guys ride the guy to get there. You don't really see that much in football. There's been guys that were unbelievable, responsible for championships. Cam Newton, Johnny Manziel didn't win a championship, but very competitive. Deshaun Watson, those guys changed the game, but those guys are so hard to find in football. Basketball, I mean, you find a pretty good bit of guys that can carry you. You saw that even with the some of the smaller teams in the upsets. You'd have one guy just shooting the lights out and carrying them to upset. So I agree with you. I mean, in basketball, you can put together a team. Nate Oates just did it. He just flipped an entire roster basically and took a team that was the number 1 seed in the tournament to a Final Four the next year. So he showed you, exactly how to do that. And I think other coaches are doing it as well.
Well, and let me ask you about Nate Oates, because I think this is an interesting dynamic, because Nate Oates is essentially like, when the Alabama job, the football job came open, all eyes turned to Dan Lanning, who immediately said, no, I'm good here at Oregon. Nate Oates essentially did the same thing when the Kentucky job opened. All eyes turned on him. He's like, no, I'm good here. Like,
the difference is, though, Alabama didn't really reach out to Lanning. We've never heard that. The fan base, I think it started with somewhere over in his neck of the woods. Some reporter reported that Dan Lanning was a candidate. He actually reported he was in Tuscaloosa, but there was never been. I mean, he's got an $18 million buyout, I think. I don't think that was even
20 million. 20. Nate Oates has the 18.
Now, Kentucky, at least we know that Kentucky contacted Nate Oates on a Monday because there was a little bit of panic. Alabama was able to, not with no panic, but I mean, they reached out on Monday. Boosters stepped up. Greg Burns stepped up. They agreed to give him a practice stadium. NIL money came flowing in that he needed. So we do know at least there was that far. With Lanning, it was just like a report. on some small TV station, and then 10 people reported it was true when it was never true.
Right.
Dan, Dan Lanning was at home watching The Bourne Identity with his son or whatever, which is great,
Right.
which makes it better. But so yeah, those huge buyouts I think factor. But I think Kentucky, you want your guy, and in Kentucky's defense, they shot for the stars. I don't know exactly. I mean, you go after Hurley, a Final Four national champion coach. You go after Nate Oates, a guy that, fits exactly what you want to do to bring the excitement of Final Four coach. Scott Drew, national champion coach. And they're, even mentioned, I don't know if it got to Billy Donovan, but another national championship coach. So Kentucky shot for the stars. There were some long odds on all those guys. But, yeah, it was a different search than Alabama's football search.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You go back to that, less than 48 hours, Alabama had the guy and in place and
in Tuscaloosa. Like he was in Tuscaloosa. So we start with Saban retires, catches everybody off guard. Dan Lanning is on campus miraculously. I guess he owns a DeLorean with plutonium, and he shot over to Tuscaloosa. And then the next day, all heck's breaking loose. And, that guy was on back at Alabama within 48 hours. It's just, you have to applaud how that went down, considering they felt they got their guy.
Yeah, and it's going to be a very interesting situation. I mean, I was there a couple of weeks ago, talked to Kalen DeBoer at length. It doesn't feel like they're missing a beat, which I think is probably very disappointing to the rest of the SEC, because that's one thing I talked about with everybody when Nick Saban retired was, okay, what does this open up for the rest of everybody else? And now I think people are looking at it like, oh, well, still have to deal with them. Nobody is saying Kalen DeBoer is going to be Nick Saban, but I think everybody else is still looking at Alabama as a significant impediment to their own success.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, 5 years ago, they were saying Dabo wouldn't take that job. Dabo don't want that job. Who's going to want that job? Nobody wants that job. I mean, that's what they were saying. I really think it was just speaking it into existence again. I don't think they actually felt that. They wanted to feel it. It started out just 2 months ago. Kalen DeBoer and staff couldn't recruit. They've got a top 5 class now, I think. They couldn't recruit. Auburn fans referred to him as Brian Harsin, Kalen Harsin, which is Kalen DeBoer's already got more commitments than Brian Harsin ever got at Auburn, I believe, to be honest. I mean, it's close anyways.
Well, more top 100 commits for sure.
Well, there's no comparison between the two. I mean, just because you're from the West Coast, I don't think that they're all the same person. I think that was just kind of, again, wishful thinking. But, I mean, you look at what Alabama's done, you have to give them. Because, I mean, again, if you and I had this discussion, where are we at after Saban retires? I don't think this is where they're at now is what you and I described. I think there'd be a lot more.
No, and I didn't think it would be this seamless. I didn't think that was possible. And look, we still got to see him coach games.
Sure.
But I think they're going to have a really good roster. They have a chance to be a really good team. And Kalen DeBoer's game day coaching, I don't feel like is in much doubt at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's true what you say, that the doubters will say, we haven't seen him coach a game. Well, all we can judge is at this point of his tenure. And at this point of his tenure, I feel like he's done a good job, 10 out of 10. I think he's done the things he had to do to even in the portal, if you watch, and I'm not saying they're all equal, but you lost Caleb Downs, you got Keon Saab, you lost, lost Julian Sayin, you got Austin Mack,
you lost Caden Proctor, you got Caden Proctor, which is about the best replacement you can find.
That's one of my favorite lines. And then, you got Parker to replace Seth. So they did a good job, Jeremy to replace Bond. So they lost talent. I'm not saying they're all equal. Some are better than others, but they replaced that talent out of the gate going into this portal to get to spring. And now they've got a chance to upgrade again, right? They've got another chance to find out what's in the portal. I've just been shocked how quiet it is on as of Monday morning. I'm like, what's happening? They're making me nervous, but not Alabama. I'm talking nationally. It's just
well, Alabama. I would think Alabama's got to lose a few from the bottom of the roster because they got to be within 80. They got to be under the 85, especially if they're going to bring some more in. But the question is the type of player who can come in and help Alabama even going to be available?
Yeah, I think that's the first thing. You don't just take anybody. And again, the portal shopping's not as easy as you think. I mean, this is about, if you're in the portal and you're, say, a junior, redshirt sophomore, you're probably looking for an instant starting job. Now, there's going to be guys that are true freshmen or are just signed in December and a coach left, or Michigan's an interesting situation to watch with their window was oddly timed, so they could have some movement possibly, or they might have them all locked down. But you've got to have a guy. You got to be able to, you can't just recruit a guy out of the portal and say, hey, you're for sure starting at quarterback, knowing you've got a starting quarterback. You're going to have to work that. Not many guys are coming to be a role player unless they're young, I think, and just looking for a change, which I also think could happen.
Well, we will find out because that portal is open as we speak. So we will see what happens. Tim, thank you so much.
You got it, Andy. Anytime, buddy.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.